I want to be very clear about one thing before I tell you any of this. I am not a hero. I am a mechanic. I fix pipes, seal coolant lines, and argue with old machinery until it agrees to work again. That is my job. That is all I ever signed up for. My name is Dale Rourke. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a small town in northern Canada, where the winters were long and the people were stubborn. And I think that is the most important piece of background information anyone needs to understand what happened on Cathara Station. Cathara Station is not a pleasant place. It hangs in disputed space like an old tin can that someone forgot to throw away. The lights flicker. The corridors smell like burnt wiring and recycled air. Half the docking clamps are held together with emergency patch foam that was supposed to be temporary 7 years ago. I had been hired to fix a coolant manifold in the lower ring. Routine work. A 2-day job, maybe 3. Then I would take my credits and go home. I had been on the station for 4 days when the wall fell. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was worse than that, actually. It was a slow, ugly groan that traveled through the metal floor beneath my boots. And then a section of the lower docking corridor simply gave up. Old welds, the inspector's report would later say. Structural fatigue. Years of deferred maintenance. The kind of thing that happens when nobody wants to pay for it until someone gets hurt. I heard the alarm before I heard the groan. I was already in that part of the station, 2 levels above, checking a pressure junction. I pulled up the schematics on my datapad out of habit. The display showed a sealed bulkhead, a blocked corridor, and 4 life signals on the wrong side of a wall that was about to lose its fight with vacuum. Emergency response was 11 minutes away. The bulkhead had maybe 4 minutes before the seal cracked. I did the math. I swore. I ran. There is a thing that other species do not fully understand about humans. We are not the strongest beings in the galaxy. We are not the fastest, or the most armored, or the most psychically gifted. What we are is deeply, almost pathologically bad at accepting a situation we think we can change. Some scientists call it problem-solving instinct. My father called it being too stubborn to know when to quit. Whatever it is, it looked at 4 minutes and an impossible corridor and said, well, let us see what we can do. What I did was not elegant. I found the coolant line I had been working on earlier that day, still disconnected at one end. I found a cargo strap hanging on a wall hook. I found a manual pressure bypass valve that was so old it barely had markings left on it. I put these 3 things together in a way that the manufacturer almost certainly never intended. Then I braced my back against the wall, held the valve open with my body weight, and yelled at the 4 figures on the other side of the sealed door to move. They moved. All 4 of them got through. The last one had barely cleared the threshold when I had to let go, and the pressure change knocked me sideways into the opposite wall hard enough to see stars. 10 seconds later, the section behind the bulkhead failed completely. The sound it made was enormous, and then very, very quiet. I sat on the floor with my ears ringing, and looked at the 4 people I had just pulled out of a dying corridor. The first one I noticed was tall, with the segmented limbs and layered eyes of the Thessari species. She was already standing perfectly straight, which I found impressive given what we had just been through. She looked at me with all 4 of her eyes and said, in very precise and formal translator standard, that she had noted the wound on my forearm, and that this created a life bond obligation under Thessari law that she intended to honor completely. She asked for my quarters assignment. I told her my forearm was fine. It was just a scrape. She said that was not relevant to the obligation. Her name, she said, was Sevara. The second was small and luminous. That is the only word for it. She was Dolvine, a species I had read about but never met, and her skin gave off a soft blue-green light that pulsed gently as she breathed. She was looking at me the way someone looks at a piece of music they have been searching for a long time. Her name was Mira, and she told me very softly that she had felt the shape of my emotions during the crisis, and that she had never encountered anything quite like them before. I asked what she meant. She said I had been afraid, yes, but the fear was so small compared to everything else. She touched my sleeve, very gently, as though checking that I was real. The third was watching me, with an expression I had learned to recognize on certain species. It was the expression of someone who is furious, and is being furious as quietly as they can manage. She was Korath, broad-shouldered and scaled, with the kind of posture that said she had spent her whole life in command of something. Her name was Yajara, and she was a station security captain, which explained both her presence in the corridor and her precise fury. She told me, in clipped and very controlled tones, that a Korath warrior who is survived by another in a life-threatening situation must by law and honor acknowledge the other as a combat superior. She did not look happy about this. She looked like someone doing the right thing while actively hating the right thing. The fourth sat down beside me on the floor, which nobody else had done, pulled out a small datapad of her own, and began speaking. Her name was Tess, short for Thessari Voon, which was a Velundi name, and the Velundi were a people who approached everything as a calculation. She had, she explained, been running a compatibility analysis since the moment the corridor had begun to fail, because high-stress situations produce accurate data about a person's fundamental decision-making patterns. She showed me her screen. There were 6 columns of criteria, each with a numerical rating and a brief note. My rating in the column labeled response latency under external threat was, apparently, exceptional. I told her that I had simply not thought about it long enough to decide not to do it. She said yes, and wrote that down. I thought about explaining that I was a plumber, essentially. I decided this could wait. The days that followed were not the quiet return to routine I had hoped for. Sevara began accompanying me into maintenance shafts. This was not a request. It was simply something that happened. She would appear beside me in the morning, with tools, and help me work in total silence, with a precision that was honestly remarkable. I tried 3 times to explain that the life bond obligation was not necessary. She explained, equally patiently each time, that what I thought was necessary had no bearing on what was true. After the 3rd conversation, I accepted that we had reached an impasse and went back to fixing pipes. She handed me a wrench at exactly the right moment. I said thank you. She said it was obligation. We understood each other. Mira left things outside my quarters. Small things. A piece of bioluminescent crystal that hummed softly in the dark. A tiny creature, about the size of my fist, that turned out to be a Dolvine comfort animal. It ate one of my socks. I could not be angry about it because the creature looked at me with enormous eyes, and Mira looked at me the next day with the same enormous eyes, and asked if the gift had been well received, and I said yes, absolutely, the sock sacrifice was worth it. She lit up so bright I had to blink. Yizara challenged me to a breath-holding contest. I do not know what the expected outcome was. Humans can hold their breath for a surprisingly long time when trained, and also when stubborn, and I had been stubborn since I was 7 years old. I won. She looked at me differently after that. She did not say anything, she just looked at me differently. The next morning she appeared at the small exercise area I used, and began training beside me in complete silence. We did this every day for the rest of my time on the station. She never explained it. I never asked. Tess scheduled interviews. I thought they were casual conversations. They were not. She was completing her compatibility matrix. She asked me questions about resource allocation, about how I approached problems I could not immediately solve, about what I considered worth protecting. I answered honestly because I did not know I was being evaluated. Apparently my honesty was itself one of the criteria. She revised her probability estimate upward every 2 days. By the end of the first week, she told me the number was 97.3%. I asked what it was a probability of. She said long-term partnership success. I asked if she had run this analysis on anyone else. She said she had run it on 47 beings across her lifetime of travel. The highest previous score had been 61%. I sat with that information for a while. The 4 of them were also very much aware of each other. They did not get along. Sevara felt that Mira's gift-giving was an inappropriate expression of an informal bond claim. Izara felt that Tess's mathematical approach to a combat honor tradition was deeply disrespectful. Tess felt that all 3 of them were being irrational. Mira kept accidentally reading all of their emotional states at once, and had to excuse herself twice. I would walk into the middle of these arguments without understanding what they were about, and say something honest and accidentally reasonable, and then retreat to my work. The station administrator later told me that the phrase, "the human situation," had begun appearing in official meeting notes. I was not sure how to feel about that. The second crisis came 12 days in. A power grid failure. The real kind. The kind that would shut down the resupply corridor and leave half the station without climate systems for weeks. The official response was tangled in authorization chains and budget disputes, and 3 separate committees arguing about jurisdiction. I looked at the schematics. I looked at the problem. I found the faulty relay cluster, crawled into the grid access shaft that had not been opened in 4 years, and fixed it with a combination of spare parts, my own equipment, and a solution that I will admit was not technically approved by any engineering standard I am aware of. All 4 of them were there when I came out. They had followed me, or found me, or simply been drawn by whatever strange gravity had formed between us. I sat on the floor. This was becoming a habit. I looked at them, really looked, for the first time without rushing somewhere or fixing something. Severa, standing straight and still and present. Mira, glowing softly, her eyes very wide. Ijara, arms crossed, jaw set, watching me with an expression that was not quite fury anymore, and not quite anything else I had a word for. Tess, datapad down for once, just looking. I said the only honest thing I could say. I told them I did not understand most of their customs. I told them the ones I did understand were terrifying to me, in ways I could not fully explain. I told them I had not done any of this to earn anything, or claim anything, or begin anything. I had just done it because the problem was there, and I could try. But I said that I would do it again, for any of them, without thinking about it. That was simply true, and I did not know what to do with it being true. Mira made a sound I did not have a word for. Severea looked at me for a long moment, and then said, very quietly, that the Thessari had a concept they called the honest debt, which was the kind of bond that forms not from obligation, but from character. She said she had only read about it. Ijara uncrossed her arms. Tess opened her datapad, looked at her matrix, and then slowly closed it again. I found out later, through a very patient explanation from the station administrator, and then from each of them separately, that there were pathways forward that none of their cultures technically prohibited. Some of these pathways were old traditions. Some were simply the absence of any rule that said no. Tess pointed out that the arrangement optimized for complementary skills, resource efficiency, and long-term problem-solving capacity. Yajara said she would tolerate the others if they proved themselves useful, which from her was essentially a warm welcome. Mira simply glowed and said she had known from the first moment. Severa said the obligation had always been mutual. She had just been waiting for me to catch up. I called my mother. She asked if I was eating enough. I told her I might be getting married. She asked how many times. I said I was still working out the exact number. She said that sounded about right for our family, and asked if I needed her to send anything from home. I went back to the coolant manifold the next morning. It still needed finishing. 4 people were waiting for me when I came out. The station administrator sent me a formal written request asking that I please, if at all possible, stop preventing crises on my own, as it was making the emergency response team feel professionally inadequate. I wrote back that I would try my best. I will not try my best. If the problem is there and I can move, I am already moving. That is just what humans do. We do the math wrong, we go in anyway, and somehow, it keeps working out. I am a mechanic. I fix things. I cannot seem to stop.